I used to think that if you gave everything away, time, health, and wealth, your children would appreciate it. Then one day, my son forgot to hang up. She's too stupid to realize what's going on. His voice was flat and frustrated. When we get a house, we'll move her somewhere cheaper. She doesn't need that much space. Then my daughter-in-law laughed. She totally believes it. And just like that, the atmosphere around me became humiliating and painful. I sat at the kitchen table, cup of tea raised to my lips, listening to the people I loved talk about me like I was a nuisance. It was the moment something inside me exploded, not out of anger, but out of clarity. I wasn't their family, just an account number, a signature, and a house waiting to be claimed. That night, I didn't cry, but silently blocked their phone number. By morning, my son and daughter were in a panic, demanding explanations because their accounts had been blocked and their wills had been changed. I didn't explain, just kept quiet, and quietly closed the door. They thought I was weak, but they were wrong. Now, at 78, I'm living a peaceful, quiet life in a small home beside a blooming garden, a life that is finally mine. Before you go any further, subscribe for more stories about the quiet strength inside each of us. Leave a comment and tell me, have you ever heard the truth when they thought you weren't listening? What did you do about it? That Sunday, like so many others, began with the gentle clinking of china in my sunroom. I had polished the silver tray the night before, more out of habit than necessity. The teapot was a porcelain heirloom with tiny blue violets that George and I had picked out together at an estate sale in Sonoma. He had joked that it looked too delicate for our rough hands. I disagreed. Beauty, I told him, wasn't meant to sit locked in a cabinet. It was meant to be touched, used, remembered. As I poured the Earl Grey into my favorite cup, the one with the small chip along the handle I could never bring myself to throw away, I glanced at the photo of George beside the window. He looked proud in his charcoal gray suit, his boutonniere matching the climbing camellias behind him. That camellia bush still bloomed faithfully every spring, though George had been gone nearly 2 years. Funny how plants remember. The house was silent, except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. His clock. He used to wind it religiously every Saturday morning before we'd head to the farmer's market. Now I kept it running. Though I never touched the chime, the sound was too loud in a house already echoing with absence. At precisely 3 p.m., the phone rang. Right on cue. Andrew always called on Sundays. Same time, same tone, same rhythm. I'd come to depend on it the way one depends on the mail arriving or the kettle boiling. Not for the warmth of it, but for the assurance that something still functioned on schedule. "Hi, Mom," came his voice. Polished, distracted. I imagined him pacing in his office, headset on, checking his watch. "How's your week been?" "Oh, you know," I replied, smoothing the placemat, even though no one could see it. "The garden's lovely. The camellias are in full bloom. I entered one in the community contest, actually. The judges said it reminded them of a Monet." "That's great," Andrew replied. "Really great, Mom." I could hear typing in the background. Or maybe it was a mouse clicking. He was always multitasking during our calls. Once I joked about it, and he'd laughed, promising to be better. He never was. He asked about my watercolor classes, remembering to mention them like a bullet point on a checklist. I told him about the painting I'd started, a sunrise over Big Sur cliffs, but he didn't ask what colors I'd used or where I planned to hang it. Just, "That's great, Mom. Really great." When the silence grew too long, I asked about Melissa and the kids. "They're fine," he said. "Lucas has soccer. Emily's doing that internship I told you about." "Oh yes," I said, though I couldn't recall any such thing. "That's wonderful." And then the pause. I knew this pause. It usually came right before the shift, the part where the conversation pivoted from pleasantries to something else. "Listen, Mom," he began. "Here it comes. I've been talking to a financial advisor," he continued, "and we were thinking it might be time to move some of your savings into higher yield accounts. You've got a lot sitting in low interest places, and with inflation..." I stirred my tea slowly. I see. I mean, of course it's your decision," he added quickly. "Just trying to help you make it work smarter, that's all." "I appreciate the thought," I said, my voice light, even pleasant, "but I'll think about it." "That's all I'm asking," he said. After a few more lines of predictable goodbye, the "love you, take care," and "same time next week," the call ended. I sat there a moment longer, holding the phone in my hand. It was warm, still pulsing faintly with the echo of his voice, like a ghost that hadn't left the room yet. I looked around the sunroom. Afternoon light stretched long across the hardwood floors. Dust motes floated lazily in the golden air. The hydrangeas on the far side of the garden dipped in the breeze, their large heads bowing as though in silent prayer. The house was beautiful, immaculate, filled with treasures I'd once collected with George, Waterford crystal from our trip to Dublin, the antique writing desk from Vermont, a clock from his grandfather's attic. And yet, it felt like a showroom more than a home. I carried my cup into the kitchen, rinsed it in the deep farmhouse sink, and dried it with a cloth embroidered by my mother decades ago. The pattern was faded, but her stitches were still perfect. Later that evening, I sat alone in the den, the one room I hadn't redecorated since George passed. His chair was still there, his reading lamp, his leather-bound volumes of naval history. I turned on the record player. Frank Sinatra's voice filled the space, smooth and familiar. I turned to his chair, just slightly, and whispered, "You'd think I'd be used to this by now." The leather didn't respond. Emily showed up one Thursday afternoon, unannounced, but smiling like sunshine. She had always been the more affectionate of my grandchildren, or so I believed. Her hugs lingered a little longer, her compliments a bit more practiced. That day, she brought a small bouquet of wildflowers tied with a ribbon and said they reminded her of the ones Grandpa used to pick for me. I nearly cried. We sat in the garden, under the pergola George built with his own hands. The jasmine had just started to bloom, and the air smelled sweet, full of memory. I served tea and shortbread cookies, store-bought, but arranged neatly on my mother's china plate. Emily complimented my cardigan, the way my hair looked, the new cushions on the patio chairs. Flattery, I told myself, was her way of connecting. Then, as she stirred a second spoonful of sugar into her cup, she said softly, "Grandma, I hate to ask, but I'm in a bit of a tight spot." I looked up, my smile tightening only slightly. "What kind of spot, dear?" "Just rent," she said quickly. "And groceries." I had to drop a few shifts at the salon this month. It's only temporary. I swear she asked for $5,000. "Just to get back on my feet," she said, her voice so sincere it could have passed for a prayer. I looked at her then, really looked. Her nails were freshly done, a soft pink with glittered edges. Her purse was designer, subtle, but unmistakable to someone who once sold handbags in college to pay tuition. Her phone buzzed twice on the table, the screen lighting up with messages from names I didn't recognize. Still, I wrote the check. I told myself that love doesn't tally, that grandparents help, that this is what George would have done. A week later, I saw her in town. She didn't see me. She was walking out of a boutique on Ocean Avenue, bags looped around both arms like ornaments. Her hair had been colored, beautifully done, ash blonde with low lights. I stood across the street holding my bag of produce, rooted to the sidewalk. I didn't wave. Lucas came next. He didn't bring flowers or ask for cookies. He brought a pitch deck. "I'm starting something huge, Grandma," he said, spreading out graphs and projections on my kitchen island. "It's a grocery delivery app, but smarter, AI-based, predictive, customizable. We're revolutionizing how people shop." He spoke fast, with confidence, like his father always did when he was selling me something dressed as concern. "I know you probably don't know much about startups," he said, patting my hand, "but that's where I come in. You don't need to understand the tech. You just need to believe in me." He asked for $10,000. "It gets you in on the ground floor," he said, "and when we go public, you could triple that." I looked at his eager face, so much like Andrew's when he was that age, the same furrow between the brows when he was excited, the same cleft chin, and I said yes. I told myself I was investing in his future, that it was different from giving money, that George, ever the optimist, would have applauded the spirit of entrepreneurship. 2 months later, I brought it up casually to Andrew during our Sunday call. "How's Lucas's startup going?" I asked. There was a pause. "Oh, that?" Andrew said. "Yeah, it didn't pan out. These things happen." I stared at the wallpaper in my sunroom, blue damask that had faded with time, and said, "I see." The next time I saw Lucas, he was driving a new electric SUV. When I asked about the business, he shrugged. "We pivoted," he said vaguely. "Different model now." I didn't ask for the money back. It felt undignified. Besides, it would have changed nothing. He wouldn't have understood what that money meant to me, not just its value, but the faith behind it. Susan, my sister, had begun to notice the pattern long before I dared admit it. Over lunch one afternoon, at our favorite cafe, brick walls, open windows, clinking silverware, she raised her fork mid-bite and asked, "When's the last time they visited without asking for something?" I laughed it off. "They're just young. It's a tough world out there." She didn't smile. "Margaret, you're not a wallet. You're their grandmother." I stirred my soup. "Family helps each other." "Helping goes both ways," she said. "Do they ever ask what you need?" The question stayed with me long after the check was paid. Emily came again, this time with a story about a deposit on a new apartment closer to work. Lucas dropped by with a car trouble issue and casually mentioned his credit card interest rates. Melissa called out of the blue, cheerful as ever, and said, "We've always admired your china set. It would look lovely in our dining room for the holidays." Bit by bit, my possessions began to migrate. The pearl necklace George gave me on our 35th anniversary disappeared after a visit. The silver tea service, my mother's antique mirror, even the hand-woven Afghan rug from our Morocco trip, all gone with barely a whisper. At first, I convinced myself I had gifted them, that it made me happy to see them used, but deep down, I knew. They hadn't asked. They'd assumed. My bank balance dipped. Not dangerously, but noticeably. I cut back on luxuries. No more seasonal concerts. I canceled the art museum membership. I told myself I was being prudent, but when I ran into Carlos, the gardener at the community center, and he offered me free rose cuttings I hesitated to accept, unsure if I could afford the soil mix. One evening, I stood in front of the tall curio cabinet in the hallway. The glass shelves were half empty. The reflection that stared back at me, hair pinned tight, eyes dulled, was someone I barely recognized. The woman I saw used to host dinner parties, dance barefoot in the kitchen, wear red lipstick just because. I touched the brass handle. The cabinet creaked open. I ran my hand along the shelf. The last crystal vase remained, gifted by George on the day we paid off our first home. I lifted it, not to admire it, but to hide it. In that moment, it occurred to me, I was no longer the matriarch of a family. I was the keeper of assets, assets slowly, charmingly, expertly extracted. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the call came, out of sync with our usual Sunday routine. I was in the sunroom, brushing out a watercolor wash on a new piece, a soft landscape of the cliffs near Big Sur. The light coming through the window was just right, and I was in that meditative rhythm where thought and color blend without effort. The phone rang, breaking the moment. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but years of maternal reflexes won out. "Hello," I said, setting my brush in the jar of cloudy water. "Hey, Mom!" Andrew's voice was unnaturally chipper. "How are you feeling today?" I dried my hands on a towel and took the phone to the kitchen, where the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and old wood. "I'm well," I said cautiously. "And you?" We went through the motions. Garden club updates, Emily's job search, Lucas's latest pivot in his non-existent tech company. The same phrases, the same laugh, too rehearsed to feel real. There was an undercurrent in his tone I couldn't place, an edge of anticipation, like a salesman before closing. Then it came. "Oh, by the way, Mom," Andrew added casually, "we're planning a special dinner for Lucas's birthday next week. You'll come, won't you?" It had been months since I had been included in any sort of family event, and I admit my heart lifted just slightly. "Of course," I said, genuinely surprised. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself," he replied quickly. "We've got everything handled." "That sounds lovely," I said, already wondering what gift I could afford. Something thoughtful, perhaps a book on history or a silk tie. Something that showed I still paid attention. There was a pause, and then his voice took on that particular tone I'd come to recognize. Slightly hesitant, slightly apologetic, the prelude to a financial request. "Hate to ask," he said, "but could you transfer about $300 to Melissa's account? The caterers need a deposit, and we're a bit tight this month." I frowned, just faintly. "I thought you said it was at a steakhouse." "It is," he said quickly. "They have a private room for events. That's what needs the deposit." I didn't press. Maybe I didn't want to break the illusion of being included. "Of course, Davy," I said, using his childhood nickname without thinking. "I'll take care of it." "Thanks, Mom. You're the best. Love you." "Love you too," I replied. I waited for the usual soft click of the call ending, but it never came. Instead, there was the faint rustling of fabric, a clunk, maybe the phone being set down on a table, and then voices, not from a television, from real people, in real time. "Did she fall for it?" came Emily's voice, unmistakable. A burst of laughter followed. "Hook, line, and sinker," Andrew replied, his voice transformed, sharp, flat, utterly devoid of affection. "God, I'm so tired of these calls," he continued, pretending to care about her stupid garden club meetings and those pathetic paintings she does. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. The receiver grew heavier in my hand. "Well, keep it up," Melissa's voice chimed in. "The birthday dinner will be perfect. She's been feeling left out lately, so she'll definitely come, and bring a gift. Probably cash. You know how she is." "She'll cave soon," Lucas added, sounding bored. "We can bring up the reverse mortgage idea again. Dad says with the right pressure, she'll agree." "Yeah," Emily laughed. "And once she signs over the house, we can move her into that place near the strip mall. Assisted living, cheap but clean. She doesn't need all that space." My knees went weak. Andrew again, tone businesslike. "The retirement account alone will set us up nicely. Not to mention Dad's insurance. She hasn't touched any of it. It should be used for family needs, not rotting in some fund. Mom's too stupid to see what's going on, he added. Always has been. There it was. The line that cracked something deep in my chest. I didn't hang up. I didn't scream. I simply stood there, phone pressed to my ear, as the truth poured in like ice water. This wasn't misunderstanding. This wasn't stress or a rough patch. This was calculated, planned, cruel. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where George once spread blueprints and Lucas learned to tie his shoes, the same table where we ate Thanksgiving dinners, where Emily gave me her first handmade card with stick figures and hearts. My teacup sat before me, steam long since faded. The gold rim glinted in the fading light like a mockery. I stayed there long after the voices stopped, after the background noise of their laughter dissolved into silence. At some point, I set the phone down. The house was still. No music, no clock ticking. Even the birds outside had gone quiet. I looked around. Every object now felt tainted. The chair where Lucas used to nap as a baby. The vase Melissa once admired and later took without asking. The photo of Andrew on his graduation day, beaming at George. Had they ever loved me? Had they ever seen me as anything more than a source? The grief hit not like a wave, but like a collapsing roof, all at once, overwhelming, familiar, but different. And when George died, I lost someone who loved me. This time, I lost the belief that I was loved at all. I stayed at that table until the moon rose high and cold outside the windows. I didn't cry. I just stopped hoping. By the time the sun rose over my garden, casting long, pale fingers of light across the dining table, I had already made 3 calls. The first to Susan, who answered on the second ring, the second to the bank manager I had known for 20 years, and the third to Diana Griffin, a lawyer Susan had once referred to me, just in case. Diana was direct, calm, efficient. She didn't gasp or pity me when I told her what I had overheard. "This happens more than you'd like to believe, Mrs. Whitmore," she said gently, her voice clipped but warm. "Especially when there's property accounts or life insurance involved. You've come to me at the right time." By 9 a.m., I was seated in her downtown office, a modern space with high ceilings, sharp angles, and zero sentimentality. It smelled of leather, clean paper, and certainty. We worked through a list. Remove Andrew from joint accounts, cancel every card with Melissa as an authorized user, change passwords, security questions, mailing addresses, create a revocable trust, update the will, appoint a new executor, Susan, draft a letter documenting what I overheard. "Are you ready to enforce boundaries?" Diana asked as I reviewed the final documents. I nodded. "I'm ready to draw a line, with pen, not pencil." When I walked out of her office, I felt lighter, not triumphant, not yet, but no longer hunted. Back at the house, I removed the last family photo from the hallway wall. It was one of those overproduced holiday shots, matching sweaters, fake smiles. I stared at it for a long moment, then slid it into a drawer. That space on the wall felt like the first clean breath after smoke. The next day, Susan picked me up in her Mercedes to tour retirement communities. "I know you," she said as she adjusted her sunglasses. "You're thinking this is too drastic, too final. It's not. It's smart. It's survival." We visited 3 places. The first felt like a hotel lobby that had forgotten how to smile. The second had promise until I noticed the smell, too much antiseptic and not enough life. The third, Oakwood Village, felt like a page out of a book I hadn't read yet, but wanted to. It had wide paths lined with lavender bushes, a cafe that served actual espresso, a library with armchairs worn just enough to be inviting. There was an art studio flooded with natural light and an entire room dedicated to watercolor supplies. A man with silver hair and a linen shirt was giving a lecture on light theory when we passed. "I think you've found it," Susan whispered, squeezing my arm. I nodded, unable to speak. That evening, I stood in my bedroom packing a single leather suitcase. I wasn't taking much, just the essentials. The rest would be handled by the estate company I had already scheduled. I paused over George's wedding band, which still hung from the ribbon on my vanity mirror. I slipped it into a velvet pouch and tucked it beside the framed photo of us on the Amalfi Coast, our final overseas trip before the cancer came. Outside, the camellia bush rustled. It would bloom again next spring, with or without me. I moved through the house slowly, touching each surface like a goodbye. The velvet armrest of the chair where I used to read to Emily, the brass key to the antique secretary George once repaired, the pantry, still stocked with teas no one else drank. I left the crystal vase, the one Lucas never asked for. The next morning, I changed my phone number and set up a forwarding address to Diana's office. Susan had insisted on hiring a security service to oversee the movers. "Just in case," she said, her tone sharp as glass. The last thing I did before locking the front door was take down the brass nameplate that said Whitmore. I didn't know where I would hang it next, but I knew this place had stopped being mine long ago. As we pulled out of the driveway, I didn't look back. Not at the roses, not at the windows, not even at the house that once held my life. In my lap, the welcome packet for Oakwood Village sat crisp and uncreased. On the front was a watercolor image of a winding path lined with sunflowers and benches. "Ready?" Susan asked. "More than ever." I didn't tell Andrew I was leaving. I didn't answer his texts. I didn't return Melissa's voice message that said, "Hey, did you get the deposit sent? Lucas is so excited for the party." They would find out soon enough. And when they did, Oakwood Village was unlike any place I had imagined retirement to be. It wasn't quiet in the way of hospitals or sterile facilities. It hummed with life, with conversations in courtyards, music drifting from balconies, and the scent of real coffee, strong, rich, unapologetic, wafting through the cafe near the West Garden. My apartment sat on the second floor, east-facing. Each morning, I opened the curtains and watched the sunrise bathe the watercolor table in gold. The furniture was simple, tasteful. The walls now held my own art, pieces I once kept in portfolios and closets, never daring to hang. Now, they framed my story. I started a new routine. Mondays, watercolor in the studio with soft jazz playing in the background. Wednesdays, community garden with Carlos, who gave me heirloom tomatoes and advice on composting. Fridays, tea with Margaret. Yes, another Margaret, a retired literature professor who quoted Emily Dickinson without prompting. And on Saturdays, dancing. It was at one of these Saturday socials that I saw him again. Charles White. He was wearing a navy blazer that looked intentionally rumpled, his silver hair combed back, his cane slung casually over one arm like it was merely decorative. When I walked into the community hall, I nearly stopped breathing. He saw me before I could retreat. His eyes softened, then lit up. He walked toward me, not hurriedly, not hesitantly, but with the calm assurance of someone who had waited long enough and still believed. "Margaret," he said, his voice low and steady, "may I have this dance?" I laughed, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. "You're not going to lecture me about disappearing?" He shook his head. "Only if you lead." We danced. The song was a Frank Sinatra classic, of course. My heels tapped softly against the polished floor. His steps were gentle, confident, the rhythm unforced. We didn't speak for the duration of the song. We didn't need to. Afterwards, we sat by the window with chamomile tea. He told me about the months since I vanished, how he'd asked around, how no one would tell him where I'd gone. "I thought maybe you chose peace," he said, "or maybe you were pushed into silence." "I chose both," I replied. He didn't ask for an explanation. Instead, he told me about his children in Oregon, the documentary he was working on with a local college, the bonsai tree he'd nearly killed and then revived. "Turns out, even fragile things can be saved," he said, sipping his tea. I looked at him, really looked, and I saw no shadow of manipulation, no flicker of calculation, just kindness, not the same quiet presence that had made me blush at a senior dance, long before Andrew tried to convince me Charles was dangerous. That night, we didn't talk about the past. We talked about art, about what made a brushstroke feel honest, about the way older hands, though slower, often knew better where to press. Charles walked me back to my apartment, said goodnight with a small bow, and left without asking when he could see me again. He knew I'd decide. Over the next few weeks, I let him back in, not all at once, slowly, deliberately. We met for lunch at the cafe on the courtyard. We attended a small gallery opening in town. One evening, I invited him to my apartment, where we sat on the balcony watching the sky turn lavender over the garden beds below. "You're different now," he said, watching me sketch. "Stronger," I offered. "No," he smiled. "More yourself." The community began to feel like family, the kind that didn't ask for checks or favors. Just time and presence. Carlos brought over zucchini bread. Margaret lent me poetry books. Elaine, the former ballerina turned yoga instructor, insisted I try her chair yoga class despite my reluctance. I laughed more. I painted freely. I even submitted a piece to the biannual art exhibit, a watercolor of my old camellia bush, backlit by golden morning light. I titled it, "What Still Blooms." On the night of the exhibit, Charles stood beside me as people passed by the framed piece. He didn't say much. just held my hand loosely, like a man who knew the value of quiet encouragement. Someone offered to buy it. "It's yours," I told the woman, "but only if you promise to hang it where you'll see it every morning." Later, as we walked back to our apartments, Charles paused at my door. "You once told me you weren't ready," he said, "that too much had broken." I nodded. "And now?" I looked at him, this man who never asked for anything but gave so freely. "Now," I said, "I'm still healing, but I'd like you to be part of it." He smiled, then kissed my hand. He showed up on a Monday morning, just as I was placing a vase of freshly cut lavender in the entryway of my apartment. The knock was soft, but persistent, 3 times, with the rhythm of someone trying to sound casual. I opened the door slowly, half expecting a delivery. There he was. Andrew. He stood in the corridor of Oakwood Village, looking strangely out of place. His tailored jacket didn't match the softness of the morning. His eyes scanned the space behind me as if trying to understand how I could exist outside the frame of his design. He held a bouquet of lilies, white, fragrant, unnecessary. "Mom," he said, with a practiced smile, "you look good." I didn't invite him in. Instead, I stepped outside and closed the door gently behind me. We stood by the railing, overlooking the garden where Carlos was already tending to the tomato beds. Andrew glanced down, then looked back at me. "Why did you disappear like that? No warning, no messages. We've been worried sick." I said nothing. He pushed on. "Melissa has been beside herself. The kids miss you. We all do." I tilted my head. "Do they miss me, Andrew? Or what I gave them?" He hesitated. A flicker of something crossed his face. Then came the performance. "Mom, you misunderstood. That call, you must have misheard. We were joking. Stress makes people say stupid things." "You weren't joking," I said quietly. "And you didn't know I was listening." His jaw tensed. "We were just venting. Families do that. Families don't plot to move their mother into assisted living so they can cash out her house." He looked down at the lilies in his hands, adjusting the plastic wrapping unnecessarily. "Okay," he said finally. "I'm sorry. We all are. Can we move past this? Come home. We'll do better." I took a breath. "This is my home now." He looked genuinely shocked, like I'd declared allegiance to a foreign country. "You can't be serious. You're going to stay here, with strangers?" "They're not strangers," I said. "They don't lie to me. They don't calculate my worth and what I can transfer from my account, and they don't call me stupid when they think I can't hear." His voice dropped low. "You're being dramatic. This is family." "No," I said calmly. "This was family. What's left is a choice." He stepped closer. "So what do you want? An apology? A check? What?" I almost laughed. Almost. "What I want," I said slowly, "is to never again feel afraid to answer the phone. I want to live the years I have left surrounded by people who see me as a person, not a pawn. I want honesty, respect, and peace." He blinked, like the words hadn't made sense. "And if we can't give you that," he asked, voice tight, "then we don't have a relationship," I said. Silence stretched between us, thick and sharp. He finally extended the lilies. I didn't take them. "Leave them," I said, gesturing to the table by the window. "Someone will enjoy them." Andrew stood there another moment, perhaps waiting for me to relent. But I didn't. I couldn't. He turned and walked away without another word. I watched until the elevator doors closed behind him. Inside, I poured myself a cup of tea. The lavender scent lingered from the vase. Carlos waved from the garden below. I smiled back. Later, Charles stopped by with lemon scones and the latest brochure for a weekend art fair. We sat on the balcony sharing bites and stories, letting the breeze wrap around us like an old song. And when the sun set, casting gold on the rim of my teacup, I stood at my window and looked at the lilies. Beautiful, fragile, already beginning to wilt. There's a strange kind of freedom that comes when you finally stop begging to be loved the right way. I didn't write Andrew out of my life. I wrote myself back into it. I no longer sit by the phone waiting for a message that never comes. I no longer count silence as kindness or manipulation as care. My days are filled with brushstrokes and the scent of wet earth, with morning sun pouring through tall windows and laughter over tea shared with people who expect nothing but my presence. I still think of them sometimes, Andrew, Melissa, the children, not with anger, but with a soft sadness, a quiet ache for what could have been had love meant something deeper than convenience. But that ache no longer defines me, because I have learned something Margaret Whitmore didn't always believe. Kindness isn't weakness. Boundaries are not betrayal. And peace, true soul-deep peace, often begins the moment you stop trying to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. So if you are sitting in a quiet house, wondering whether it's too late to take your life back, I promise you this, it's not. Start with a window, open it wide, let the light back in, and begin again. This is a fictional story that is not intended to offend or target anyone. It is created solely to convey a meaningful lesson to viewers, and all character names are entirely fictional.